scientist for California State Parks in the Monterey District. Today we're going to be talking to you about the Monterey Pine Forest here in Point Lobos State Natural Reserve. Monterey pine, also known as Pinus radiata, is a coniferous evergreen tree, growing an average of 80 to 100 feet tall. It is adapted to cope with stand-replacing fire disturbance, and its cones are serotinous, meaning they remain closed until opened by the heat of a forest fire or in hot weather. The abundant seeds are then discharged to regenerate on the burned forest floor. Monterey pine is native to 3 very limited areas located in Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Luis Obispo counties. It is extensively cultivated around the world for lumber and is now the most common tree in New Zealand. But here in its home range, it is considered a rare and threatened tree. It is a fast-growing but short-lived tree. It can grow at a rate of 36 or more inches per year and lives to be 100 to 150 years old. It has a shallow root system and often falls in high winds. This creates what is known as a canopy gap and allows sun to reach the forest floor and new pines can begin to grow. Seedlings develop best in full sunlight, and optimum conditions for regeneration are produced by fire. But in Point Lobos, an altered fire regime has resulted in dense stands of small pine trees, an accumulation of downed and standing dead trees, as well as numerous populations of invasive species. The winter of 2018 and 2019 produced unusually high winds, and a large amount of shallow-rooted mature pines fell, further increasing the fire fuel loads. There are currently 224.5 acres of pine forest in the reserve, all of which require some level of treatment. This fall, we have begun a project to thin the forest and reduce fuels. A variety of forest treatment techniques will be implemented, including thinning, understory vegetation management, hand clearing, chipping, and removal of invasive species. You can see here that the forest has been expanding over time. In 1935, there were approximately 90.2 acres. In 1974, there were 170.4, and today there's about 224.5 acres. The stand density is averaged at 631 trees per acre, and this will be selectively thinned to reach a stand density of approximately 145 to 195 stems per acre. Emphasis will be placed on weak, overcrowded, and dead saplings. Larger trees that are infested will be removed. Standing, dead, and downed woody material will be removed. However, some snags will be retained at a minimum of 2 snags per acre. Material will be chipped and will be disposed of both on and off site. It will be hauled off site to an air curtain burner and or piled for burning. Any woody material that is infected with pitch canker will be chipped, piled, and burned to prevent transmission. The forest corridor along Highway 1 will be maintained as a shaded fuel break. This will involve pruning dead, dying, and weak branches to a height of 6 to 8 feet above the ground, removing ladder fuels, and clearing dead and down material from the forest floor. A duff layer and shrub canopy covered layer will remain. We anticipate that this project will last approximately 4 years. If you would like more information or to support this and other projects within the park, please reach out to our partner, Point Lobos Foundation. Thank you. Hi, my name.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate that. We have questions that I'll just dive into if you're ready.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Great. I'll start with Rand would like to know, how are the fire reduction programs going?
So it is going well. We're just getting started this fall. We do have some constraints that we go up against when we try to do this type of work. One of the largest ones is nesting bird season. So all birds are protected in California. And so we try to limit the impact to those nesting birds by doing this type of work outside of their season. So a lot of the work that we'll be doing is going to take place between September and February. And then during that sort of off season, we do a lot more of the data collection and monitoring, developing monitoring points, taking measurements, which in turn informs the work that's going to take place subsequent to that. But it's going well. So far we've got several weeks worth of work in, and we've collected lots of data, and things so far are moving along very nicely. Yeah.
Great. And on that topic, will the wildlife pathways be preserved?
They will be. So it's a good question. We've just recently had an intern complete a wildlife study for us. In the past, we've looked at small wildlife, and this one was really focused on the medium to large wildlife. And as part of that internship project, the intern mapped several, if not most, of the game trails in the reserve. So those will always be protected, and we keep an eye on those for sure.
Great. What are the characteristics of the Monterey Pine Forest at PLF? Is the composition and age of the forest uniform across the reserve, or does it vary from place to place?
It definitely varies from place to place. And what we do, even though we have about 225 acres of forest, and in the grand scheme of things, that's not a very large area, but it does vary across that 225 acres. So what we do is we break the forest into management units, and we look at each one of these management units individually. So that way we are applying the appropriate prescription to the right area of the forest, and not just a uniform prescription all the way across.
What are the major insect and disease problems? How widespread are they and how serious? And how does it affect the general health?
So probably the most commonly known and the biggest threat from disease is pitch canker. And that is a disease that is created or that is caused by a fungus. And its characteristics include oozing or streaming pitch from certain areas, yellow to red, wilted tipped needles, certain branches dying off. And the main vector for that are beetles. There are quite a few trees that are resistant to it. And so when we look at reforestation techniques, we would try to select from trees that have shown resistance. And hopefully over a very long period of time, we would eventually get to a point where those trees, the entirety of the trees in the park were selected to be resistant to that. That is the major disease that we're looking for. I wouldn't classify it as completely widespread, although it is something that this year we've just started really taking an inventory of. When we find, as we're doing this inventory, any trees that are diseased, we are removing those from as a part of this project.
Mm-hmm. Is the cost of forest treatment shared between PLF and state parks?
So very good question.
Question.
What we're working on right now is funding from Proposition 68, which passed in 2018. once that funding was approved for our department, I had applied for grant money to apply some of that funds to this specific project. And that Proposition 68 was related to drought, water, parks, climate, coastal protection, and outdoor access. And the first round of funding really was at a time when we were starting to see a lot of catastrophic fires in California. And so Monterey Pine Forest in Point Lobos was selected. But this is a first phase of a project that needs much management. So there's been a long period of time that has gone by where not a whole lot was done to take care of this forest. So the funding that I have now is preliminarily to just get the forest sort of into a state where we can begin to manage it better. The major things that we're looking at right now, as you saw in the video, was the downed woody debris, a lot of ladder fuels and fuel loading on the forest floor. So getting that material out, getting the invasive species out, and getting the forest thinned out into a way to where it will have less competition over resources. It will start to grow better. We have a lot of trees that are very small, even and much smaller than they should be for their age class. So working on all of these different types of techniques. And for many years is going to take much more funding than we received for this project from the state. And so we're always looking for opportunities to continue to do more. And that's where we partner with PLF.
Yeah, and I'll chime in there too from the PLF standpoint. Our priorities are aligned with California state parks and the district needs. So we always stand ready to reprioritize our funding, as needed to the urgency of the needs at the reserve. So thank you everyone who's on here, because you are part of the solution. You're part of the prescription. And so we really appreciate your support. And it's important to know what, the important work that you're doing by supporting our foundation. And I'll move on if anyone has questions on that. There was one very close to this that I wanted to just dovetail into. Oh, yes. Which agencies will the personnel come from? How consistently and often will they be working on the site? And will this vary by season and over the 4.5 years of work? And I know you touched a little on that, Matthew, but I don't think we talked about the agencies.
Right. So the agency is State Parks, and we have, right now we have 2 full-time forestry aides that are helping to manage that project, along with one of our environmental scientists. And we are also in the process of hiring a few more seasonal employees to help with some of the labor. As you can imagine, it's a very labor-intensive project, especially in the beginning. We also contract with the CAL FIRE inmate crews that come out, and they come out in a 12-man team, and they have a lot of skills. They've been trained in firefighting. They respond to many fires in California as part of that program. And when they're not on fires, we can contract with them at a relatively reasonable rate, and use them as a labor force for us. So that's predominantly where the work, the actual labor force is coming from. And how consistently they'll be working on site really depends. A good example is this week we had one of those crews that I just spoke about scheduled. They showed up for about an hour on Monday, and then they got called to another fire. And so we're competing with that. Their fire is their first priority, obviously. And so they had to get pulled off. So we will try to continue to have this labor ongoing, though. Obviously, weather plays a factor as well, rainy days, things like that. We might not be out there as much, but my goal is to continue this project as consistently as possible through the next 4 years.
Great, Matthew. This is an excellent question from Larry that I think are on a lot of people's minds, to understand how the management practices of, how do they marry with the PLL's reserve status? Are there any conflicts?
No, there's not. So being a state natural reserve, it's primarily protected for the natural resource values that it has. And that's per public resource code, which defines that. I don't have that in front of me, but in essence, that's what it says. And manipulation of vegetation in the forest or in the reserve rather is allowed by state parks management if we are doing it to increase the health or to take care of the natural resources.
Mhm. Good. What is the percentage of pine versus cypress trees, and are pine diseases a threat to the cypress?
I don't have the actual percentages in front of me. I can look those up and get them to you. And as far as we can tell, the cypresses do not suffer from those same diseases that the pines do. They seem to be resistant to it.
Mhm. What are some of the invasive species in the pine forest?
Oh, we have several. And we also have a good idea of where they're at, also from another intern project that was done several years ago. But there are things like mustard, Cape ivy. We have a number of different non-native thistles. Those are probably the big ones. We do have some genista, also known as French broom. Yeah, and those are probably the big ones that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. You know, Matthew, last month we heard about the medium and large mammals. How do you expect this thinning project to impact the small and medium-sized animals and other plant species?
Well, I don't anticipate any negative impact at all. In fact, when we're talking about a project that's bringing a forest back into more natural conditions, there should be a positive benefit to the wildlife. There are a lot of areas that are very difficult to access and even for wildlife. And so when we're looking at movement corridors and just movement in general for the wildlife, having a less constricted understory will definitely play a role in their movement. Also, there are several areas where, because of lack of fire and other things, that you have very low diversity in terms of the understory vegetation. So a component to this project will be bringing that diversity back, whether that happens in some areas naturally through some of our prescriptions or in areas where we need to sort of intervene and maybe even do some planting. But having those diverse areas, increasing that diversity is also going to benefit the wildlife greatly.
Yeah, that's so great. Is there, okay, I am actually not sure how to pronounce one of these, but Sue, is there a scientific understanding of how these forest management practices impact the beneficial mycorrhizal fungi in the soil? Did I get that even close?
So mycorrhizae. is the term. So what mycorrhizae is a natural organism that lives in the soil, and it has a symbiotic relationship with native plant species. It, on a microscopic level, it actually helps move water and nutrients from the soil into the root system and make it available for the plants to uptake that water and nutrients. So in terms of your question for how these forest management practices impact, I'm not sure if what we are doing would impact the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil much, if at all. There, in most areas with our prescriptions, there will be very little soil disturbance. So for example, some of the images you've seen with all of the downwitty material on the forest floor, that basically gets cut up, picked up, and removed. And so mycorrhizae, my understanding would be, if we're going to affect that, would largely be due to erosion, which I don't anticipate that happening at all with this project.
Will goats or other animals be used to clear undergrowth?
No, not at this time. I have had my eyes on using goats, and perhaps in Hudson Meadow, where we have a lot of exotics. We're a ways out from something like that. It would be writing a grazing plan and really using it as a tool to benefit something specific. For instance, I've used goats in the past for helping to control yellow star thistle. Um, and the way we would do that would be putting them out in small groups at a certain period of time before the thistle goes to, starts to flower and goes to seed. And the goats would actually eat the flower heads, spines and all, and really impact that species. And then we would pull them out, and we would have to bring them back again several different times throughout that season to prevent those populations from going to seed. And if we can do that over time, year after year after year, eventually deplete the seed bank from that species, that would be the goal. But it is very, it requires a lot of work, a lot of investment, and eventually we'll get there. But I do recognize that as a one tool that could be used. We also have other tools. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Do infected trees have infected roots, and will those stumps need to be removed? That's a question.
No, good question. It doesn't necessarily infect the roots. So I'm assuming we're talking about pitch canker here, and pitch canker has not been shown to move throughout the trees or throughout the individual tree up and down. It really affects one singular spot. And what happens is the cankers actually end up girdling the tree. So that'll go all the way around through the cadmium layer, which cuts off the water movement and nutrients through that particular spot. The tree can get infected in multiple different spots, but those would each be its own individual infection. The infection doesn't move from one spot to the other.
And if there will be a prescribed burn on the ocean side of the reserve versus across Highway 1, what determining factors in making this decision?
Oh, a lot would go into that. Right now, the forest is not in any condition to do a prescribed burn just because of the amount of fuel loading over there. It would be very difficult to contain and keep it as a controlled burn without it getting out of hand. So that is something that we can look at in the future subsequent to this project. Most likely wouldn't be happening as part of this project over the next 4 years. We are taking a lot of this material and moving it across the highway to Point Lobos Ranch, where we have a large open area where we've done pile burning in the past. And that'll primarily be what we're doing with a lot of this material to help get rid of it.
Hmm. Yeah. I know that's on a lot of people's minds, especially during this time. Um, are there, I'm looking for any more questions. Is there, yeah, we do have from Elizabeth. Will volunteers be used as with invasive species project? That's a great question, Elizabeth.
Yeah, we do have a volunteer program, and right now we do at least a couple of times a month, we're doing work days for removing invasive species and planting and other projects, as we've done for at least the past couple of years since I've been here. And that is a very good question, and we can definitely look at using volunteers more on this project when we get to that phase of that part of the project. Yeah.
Okay, great. Uh, will 2 snags per acre sustain woodpecker and other cavity nesting bird populations?
Yes, we take that figure from research and literature, and that's what we found to be pretty consistent with a healthy forest. Yes.
And Rand asks, how much of the 4-year project is now funded and how much is needed? Do you have those figures? I know it's a work in
Yeah,
progress.
so the funding that I have expires June 30th of 2022. Um, and we're kind of ramping up with this funding to try to get, buying supplies, buying chainsaws, axes, materials, wheelbarrows, all of that. So there's this big initial investment, which we're using with the Prop 68 money. Um, the way we have it budgeted out, we do think that will probably take us through 4 years. But as I said earlier, we can always do more. We can always there's so much work to be done that I don't have it off the top of my head how much actually would be needed if the sky was the limit. But yeah, there's definitely a need.
And as we wind down our time together, I think the group wants to hear a little bit about you. They want to hear about your background and your any particular interests and passions.
Yeah, so, well, I'm currently the senior environmental scientist here at State Parks. I've been in that role here in Monterey District for the past about 2 years. And prior to that, I had worked in another district with State Parks as a district superintendent. I had done that for about 2.5 years. And before that, I had worked for about 12 years in similar capacities, doing a lot of restoration ecology work, a lot of erosion and soil stream bed work and things like that. I have a degree in environmental management and also a degree in natural resource management. I love the outdoors. I love parks. I love beaches. I love camping, hiking, taking my kids for hikes, and yeah, and just working for state parks is also a passion.
Well, we're so happy to be your partner, and now you know our members. You're getting to know them a little bit better, and I know their support is part of the team that we have built, and so we're proud to be part of your team. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll remind you any questions that come to mind. Please do not hesitate. You can email to me